ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהכל נהיה בדברו. We are about to celebrate Chanukah. What is Chanukah? Actually, that is the question that the Talmud poses. It says, "My Chanukah, what is this Chanukah?" The answer they give is that when the Hashmonaim, we usually identify them as the Maccabees, came into the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, at the time when the Syrians that were Hellenized had occupied Israel, and the Hashmonaim were able to overcome the occupation of those days. They came into the Beit HaMikdash and found that the menorah, which was the candelabrum that was always lit, was of course not lit, and the oil had been desecrated by the Greeks. But they did find one crucible, one small little jar with oil that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. So they used that. However, that would last normally only one day, and a miracle occurred. What was the miracle? The oil lasted for 8 days, and therefore there was time enough to produce new oil under supervision so that the menorah should continue to give its light. So what are we commemorating? We are commemorating that miracle that happened in those days. Yet, if we think about it, what was so great about that miracle? Were any lives saved by it? Did anything change in history? In other words, you had the menorah that instead of losing its light after one day, it continued on. Otherwise, it would have been in obscurity without any light for 8 additional days. No great tragedy would happen. Yet maybe our rabbis felt that the light of the menorah signifies study, illumination means many good things, while darkness means the opposite of everything that we think is good. So maybe this is why they instituted that. As a matter of fact, there is a prayer called Al Hanisim, because of the miracles that we recite 3 times a day during our prayers on Chanukah, that says, what happened in those days? The very few were able to overcome the strong. The weak the few were able to overcome the many. The weak were able to overcome the strong. And why was that? God helped us. So what did they do? They established 8 days of praise of the Almighty, thanks to the Almighty for what he did. But there's no mention actually of the celebration of the lighting of the candles, which is strange, but it was instituted anyway. But we cannot get away from the fact that the main celebration of Chanukah is really the fact that our ancestors were able to overcome their conquerors. They fought against them and they came out victorious. This is what we really celebrate in Chanukah. What happened in those days? Well, the Syrians that were Hellenized under Greek leadership, what they wanted is, we should be a little bit more tolerant. You want to be Jewish, okay, but be a little bit Greek at the same time too. Let's interchange our cultures. There is a legend in the Talmud that Alexander the Great came to the temple in Jerusalem and offered a sacrifice to God. Well, he thanks the Jewish God that helped him to conquer that land. In other words, he knew that he had a mountain called Olympus where all the gods lived. Well, he'd incorporate another few gods more. Why not? Well, maybe the Greeks themselves were not that compromised with this Olympus mountain. They believed in their gods, but not that much, really. They had many other beliefs at the same time too. And what does tolerance mean? It means let us negotiate, let us interchange. And the Jewish people didn't want to do that. They were obstinate. They don't want to incorporate anything that is strange to them. As a matter of fact, this happened in the very beginning of our history. Abraham left Ur. Ur was a very advanced city in those days. Culture was rampant in Ur, and he left for no man's land, in a sense, because he wanted to be different. You know, when our ancestors were in Egypt, they were enslaved. They could have become mixed, melded together with the Egyptian population, but they didn't. You know, according to our tradition, only 20%, a fifth of the Jewish people left Egypt. 4/5, 80% remained. And what? And assimilated, of course. And this is what the Greeks wanted, in a sense. Don't be different. Be a little bit more tolerant. What is tolerance? Is tolerance really respect for somebody else's ideas? I don't think so. I don't think so. If you're very firm in your ideas, can you be tolerant with somebody who's against those ideas? If you believe in democracy, can you tolerate a little bit of tyranny? Can you do that? I don't think you can do that. If you believe in truth, can you tolerate a little bit of a lie? I don't think so. In other words, if you are very clear in your principles, you don't want to negotiate them. One thing is to respect others, to be different. That's something else. But I don't want to be like that. I want to retain my own identity. What happened to the Hebrews that remained in Egypt? They just disappeared among the Egyptians. What would have happened to the Jewish people had our ancestors not become obstinate and be loyal to their own principles at the time of Chanukah? That is 165 years before the Common Era happened. What would have happened if they would have negotiated? Simply, there would have been no Jewish people. So many of the peoples of those days disappeared because they integrated into other cultures, into other societies. So what does Chanukah really mean? Chanukah means really loyalty to your principles, that notwithstanding that many oppose it, and at the time of Chanukah, many estimate that only 10% of the Jewish people were willing to fight against the Hellenizers of those times. 90% wanted to adopt Greek culture. Greek culture was great at the time, was very attractive. And we are here today because we were obstinate, we were different. My very revered master, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, in one of his writings mentions the following, that in the story of Purim, Mordechai is called Ha-Yehudi. And he says the Hey and the Chet of the word Ha-Yehudi, a chet can be replaced with replace the Hey. Then instead of Yehudi, it becomes Yechidi. Yechidi means singular, different. The fact that he wanted to remain different. This is what really saved the Jewish people. Nowadays, you know, there are different currents when it comes to definition of sexuality, when it comes to definition of what the family really is, of what are the things that should be moving us. We live in a society that is very materialistic and has different ideas. I think the challenge is as big today as it was in the time of the Maccabees, of the Hashmonaim, over 2,000 years ago. And I think if we are loyal to our principles, we transmit them to our children and future generations, the Jewish people will have existence forever. Make sure that you are part of the minority, if that is so, that retains the true values of Judaism.